Who at Nintendo could have ever realized that when they created a simple tech demo to kickstart their new console, they would be making not just a game, but a generation-defining experience that would be enjoyed for years to come and cited by many, including myself, as one of the greatest games of all time. A game that was so popular that it's being remade for the Nintendo Switch 14 years later. Wii Sports did an amazing thing for the Wii, Nintendo, and even our childhoods. Realizing that this game needed a sequel, Nintendo managed to hit it out of the park with Wii Sports Resort, a game that some argue is even better than the first, which expanded the Wii Sports idea and built upon a simple playground created for Wii Fit, turning it into the beautiful Wuhu Island. Like the original Wii Sports, Nintendo could not have realized how successful this game would be, and how this small tract of land would become one of the most well-known and cherished gaming landscapes of all time. For as beautiful as this game is, though, there's just something off. You might have experienced it yourself when you played this game as a kid. Behind those happy, fun-loving, and slightly fuzzy graphics hide dark secrets. A strange hidden lore, one of myths and peculiar yet beautiful architecture, and a bygone civilization that once inhabited Wuhu Island. For as much as the game has been enjoyed by the masses, pushed to the brink by speedrunners and competitors, and torn apart by data miners, we don't understand the world of this game. Not one bit. It's sort of a thing in the Wii Sports community that there is lore to the series, but we really don't know what it is. That's why I was compelled to make this video. I need to unearth the potentially insane truth that lies beneath this happy island. There are so many questions to answer about this game, and not just in this game, but of the whole Wii Sports series, and of all the games with Wuhu Island in them, and maybe even all the games with Mii's in them. But looking at all of that would overwhelm us very quickly. You see, based on the appearances of Wuhu Island and the Mii's, it's very unclear how Wuhu Island fits into a Nintendo universe, a concept which we really don't understand anyway. If we assume that there's just one version of Wuhu Island, we have to accept that all of these games exist in the same universe, and it's just very complicated. To be clear, this video is the first in a series that I'll be doing which aims to tackle all of these questions, but I think we need to start at a simpler place. For this video, I'm going to present a theory about Wuhu Island coming exclusively from Wii series games, specifically these ones. I'm going to ignore all other content besides those games because I want a stable base for this series. There will be videos down the line that complement or contradict this theory, so this video will only present one idea I have about the history of Wuhu Island. Now that the rules have been made clear, let's do our best to try and understand what exactly this island is hiding. Wuhu Island, a tropical paradise, though perhaps a lonely one. Hints of permanent civilization in Wuhu Island include the visiting cruise ships and, well, the obvious need for importations for products like gasoline, but for the most part, this is an isolated place. How can we even find information about it? Well, there are actually a couple of places. The world itself does speak to us in many interesting ways, as you'll learn very soon. But we also have information in the eye points and the game manual. Real-world connections will also be invaluable in creating this theory. Before we even examine the history of this island, let's just take a look at what's here. Wuhu Island is the largest island in the Wuhu archipelago. The island is clearly defined by Maka Wuhu, the semi-active volcano which, side note, has dimensions that are far too small and steep to make any sense, but whatever. Besides the giant volcano, the next most attention-grabbing feature would arguably be Wuhu Town, the portside community where the Mii's reside. Behind Wuhu Town lies a lovely plain sandwiched between a cliff lighthouse and the base of the volcano, adjacent to which is a beach. There's a castle here too. The island is also touched by signatures of civilizations that seem to be long gone. These include two distinct architectural styles, the first being sets of monoliths at many places on the island, from the inside of the volcano to the cliffside. The next set of ruins consist of temples and other structures made from smooth-cut stone, clearly requiring more advanced masonry knowledge and equipment. These buildings can be found topside or even deep in a cove. So, who created these structures? And how did they do so? There isn't much to work with as far as materials on Wuhu Island. How long did they live here? Where did they go? It's clear from the eye points in the game that these are labeled as ancient structures, and the Mies themselves don't know any of the answers to these questions. So even if these structures were built by Mies, they weren't the Mies that live on Wuhu Island right now. To learn the story of Wuhu Island, I think we need to examine everything we know about these ancient civilizations to hopefully try and explain how the Mies came to this island in the number that live there today. While I won't throw out any hard numbers or dates yet, it's clear based on the different buildings on the island that people have been here for a very long time. Wuhu Island itself has undergone distinct phases. Phase 0 of sorts is what I will call the pre-arrival era. This is simply the time of the island's birth and growth before contact with intelligent life. Wuhu Island was likely created via some tectonic plate and hotspot interaction and populated with fauna slowly over time according to the concept of insular biogeography, which we will visit in depth a bit later. The next phase is the one dominated by the ancient Mies, who created the monoliths and were the first to live on the island. This is a phase I will call the early civilization era. Now, wait a second. Before I explain these two phases, I need to clarify a position I'll take for the rest of this video. You see, many in the Wii Sports Resort community, including whoever wrote the wiki, believe that the creators of the monoliths and the creators of the marble buildings were two distinct civilizations who lived on the island at the same time, and potentially even fought one another, perhaps to extinction. This is what I would like to call the two-civilization hypothesis. While it's an interesting thought, and can help to explain why these structures were abandoned, I strongly disagree with the two-civilization hypothesis for a few reasons. I'll take some time to disprove it before we get much into phase 1 and 2, because things will make a whole lot more sense. One reason I believe that these two civilizations couldn't have existed at the same time is due to the clear difference in their abilities. One was barely cutting and moving stone, while the other was able to assemble intricate structures without even using mortar. These civilizations would clearly interact with one another, and it really doesn't make much sense that there would be such a difference in capability between the two of them. Next, and this is the most obvious reason, is that Wuhu Island is teeny. Her dimensions really don't make sense at all. The island is small, and way too small for two completely different civilizations to grow independently of one another. There could have been different villages across the archipelago, but there's no way that one civilization wouldn't cover this island, which is only a couple square miles. How do I know the size of the island? Well, I'm glad you asked. The easiest way to determine the size of the island is to look at the tennis courts, because they're a standard size, that being 78 by 36 feet. We can use this to measure the rest of the island, which I myself would do, but I don't really want to. So instead I'll reference someone else's work, specifically J. Casey's 34, who did the math a long time ago, originally mistaking the tennis court for a pool, but then changing his math to arrive at the conclusion that Wuhu Island is a mere 1.03 square miles. That seems very small, but if you think about it, it really makes sense. Wuhu Island just isn't that big. So given this, I highly disagree with the idea that two civilizations could live completely separately in 1.03 square miles of room. Now, something we'll cover a bit later in this video is that Wuhu Island was once larger than it is now, as there was some land that has sunk into the sea, probably after the volcanic eruption, but this still wouldn't have been enough to support two distinct civilizations. It just makes more sense that these different pieces of architecture come from two different time periods. Now that that's been made clear, let's learn about Phase 1. Phase 1, the early civilization era, saw the rise and fall of an ancient civilization defined by their seafaring ability and ability to move great stone monoliths across the island. Wait, seafaring? Yes, seafaring. This civilization had the capacity to create and use great canoes. How do I know this? Well, first, how else would they have arrived on the island? And second, how would they have moved this stone monolith from Wuhu Island to this island out here? I imagine on an island so small they had to have made the monoliths in one spot and then moved them around. Now you might be picking up on what I'm referring to already, but just think for a second. This civilization is mirroring a real-life one that you definitely know about. Seafaring, monoliths, island. Seafaring, monoliths, island, seafaring, monoliths, island, seafaring, monoliths, island, Polynesia. Yes, Rapa Nui. I believe that much of Wuhu Island, at least for this early period, was inspired by Rapa Nui from a design perspective. Rapa Nui, also known as Easter Island, has a whole lot in common with Wuhu Island. First off, Rapa Nui is subtropical, which is at least remotely close to the tropical Wuhu Island. But you also have these stone monoliths. Now, wait, obviously, the stone monoliths on Rapa Nui, the Moai, are much more detailed than these rocks, but there's still some structural similarity. Not only are they both big, but they were moved great distances and stood upright. Furthermore, like the Moai, there must be parts of these monoliths underground if they've stayed upright for so long. But remember, we know that the Wuhu volcano exploded at least once in the past, being 200 years ago. So what if these monoliths were more like the Moai, resembling some sort of figure, but were damaged by the flow of lava? I suspect this is what actually happened, and I'd like you to remember this point for later on in the video. So what happened to these well-off people? Now, for this theory, I believe that these ancient people died off. How it happened is not incredibly important, and I'm down to two main possibilities. The first possibility for their death is pretty obvious given that there's a looming volcano dwarfing the entire island. This volcano could have erupted and killed off the civilization. However, I tend to disbelieve this theory, mainly because science can estimate the dates of both when a volcano erupts and when these statues were formed, and the eye points mention nothing about this ancient extinction. There's lots of physical evidence that would have been left behind from this eruption, like what we see in Pompeii. Even if it was thousands of years ago, I have to think that at some point, some pieces of evidence like a body cast would have been discovered. So let me propose another idea. This one incorporating what may have happened to the people of Rapa Nui in real life. Now, there are plenty of reasons the creators of the Easter Island statues might have died off, and it's a very complex and highly debated subject, but one possibility is ecocide. Essentially, the Polynesians living there saw their society collapse after they cut down all of the island's trees, which inadvertently removed habitats for keystone animal species, depleting food resources. Now, this is somewhat of an antiquated model for the society's collapse, and new research has potentially disproved this line of thought, but something I think is interesting is that of all the trees on Wuhu Island, none of them look remotely mature. Furthermore, I struggle to believe that these trees are native. They could be some form of tropic pine tree, but I feel that it's more likely that people planted these trees in the modern day, mainly due to their new age. Now you might be thinking, the volcano erupted 200 years ago and that could have destroyed all the trees, which is why they are young. And this is absolutely true, but these trees look like 50 years old at the most, not 200 years old. I don't think there were trees when the volcano exploded 200 years ago. There was clearly some human involvement in their planting. Because of the damage that the volcanic eruption did to the island 200 years ago, we probably can't study the environment enough to make a conclusion about accidental ecocide on behalf of the ancient people, but it is a real possibility. Overharvesting would be a death sentence for an island this remote, which is why it's my number one theory to what happened here. Now, I'm no biologist, so much of this is probably wrong, but fortunately it doesn't matter because one way or another this civilization did go extinct. So this is the start and finish of Phase 1. Wuhu Island was a beautiful paradise, and similarly to the real-life Polynesian people, inhabitants arrived by canoe to the island, lived there for generations, created some form of monument that may have a religious significance, and through a process of deforestation and accidental climate destruction, or a volcanic eruption, either way, they died off. Next up is Phase 2, the Healing Era. This was a period of time where the island went from being bare, either due to volcanic eruption or loss of trees, to a stage of natural beauty again. The island's trees grew back naturally, which eventually formed natural habitats for bird species. You might be wondering, if there was no one on the island, how did the trees grow back? Well, small mosses are typically the first things to grow after a volcanic eruption, if that were what destroyed the ancient civilization, but we can also look at the concept of insular biogeography, which seeks to explain how islands become teething with life. The basic concept of this theory is that immigration and extinction are the main factors in determining the species diversity of an island. Furthermore, this concept recognizes that island life comes from the mainland, in a variety of ways. Birds that get lost and arrive on the island can pass seeds, or even dust and water currents can move nutrients and seeds naturally. Some of the factors that influence how rich an island's species makeup is include the island's distance from the mainland, how much time passes, and even just luck. So Phase 2 was a time of life somehow being brought back to this island and growing, turning it closer to the gorgeous place we know of today, though with many differences. This phase is the second longest behind Phase 0, and I estimate that it lasted somewhere around 1,000 years. Then, something changed. In the 1,000 years that the island healed, it remained relatively untouched, until a wave of exploration similar to the real-world colonization and exploration that occurred in the 1500s through 1800s led to the discovery of this island by some me. This is where, for the Mies in the game, the modern history of Wuhu Island starts, and record-keeping became standard. Phase 3 is one I would like to call the Second Arrival Era. This island likely saw some Mii settlement, which was probably a mix of Miis wanting to capitalize on plants like bananas or coconuts that could be farmed, and potentially some indigenous Mii population from nearby islands. True to real-world fashion, it's possible that the island was revisited by indigenous Miis before it was quote-unquote discovered by another Mii who made the island mainstream, so we should consider the possibility that there was a second indigenous Mii population on Wuhu Island. One that might have even been exploited in some capacity for the production of cash crops. These people lived on the island for quite a while until something drastic happened. The ground began to shake, rumbling could have been heard, an acute hissing which turned into a deafening scream from the heavens. Maka Wuhu is erupting. A plume of lava and ash shoots into the air. Mies flee for their lives. Without modern technology, this sudden eruption was hard to predict. Many made it onto boats and escaped, but others met a tragic fate. Any buildings on the island were burnt to a crisp, and then the island itself split in half. Ash-covered Mies that escaped to boats watched in horror as cliffs and sections of the island sunk into waters the earth shook, sending waves everywhere, nearly capsizing their craft. The island itself, and not just her inhabitants, had been scarred. In the months following this eruption, brave Mies returned to the island to assess the damage. Lava had covered much of the island, and life would have to be reintroduced, but otherwise it was determined to be safe to visit. Small chunks of the island had sunk into the sea, but they were mostly replaced by new land from the cooling lava. In the span of a few years, life inched towards the state it had once been at. Wuhu Island was developing its own culture, the people united by the hard work of rebuilding after the tragedy. Life marched on for 180 years, concluding this era. Now, hang on a second. I forgot something. You're probably wondering right now, what about the second civilization I talk about? The ones who built the stone monuments. And what about Summerstone Castle? Well, my friend, get ready for the biggest twist in Wii Sports history. These are not real ruins. Yes, you heard that correctly. I was trying to figure out how Wuhu Island, as seen in Wii Fit, which doesn't have the ruins, made sense in the timeline, and then I realized these ruins are not real. They're fake, as are many of the attractions on Wuhu Island. Let me explain this and introduce to you Phase 4, the Resort Era. Around 20 years before the events of Wii Sports Resort, and presumably Wii Sports, given that the Miis in either games do not appear to have aged, someone had the fantastic idea to turn Wuhu Island into a resort. Some rich Mii entrepreneur envisioned the island generating huge lumps of cash, hand over fist, like any resort does. Golf, scuba diving, hang gliding, all adventurous and expensive activities. Furthermore, creating a stadium and using the island to host high-level games would not only draw attention to the island, but stock the hotel and make tons of money. But this resort needed more than that. It needed the perfect feel. It needed to be unique. The monuments left on the island were a great start. They brought some interesting character to the location, but they alone wouldn't be enough. These monuments were a place you could visit, and they were likely protected by UNESCO or some Mii equivalent organization, meaning that there could be some opportunities for extra funding to protect these heritage sites. But this entrepreneurial Mii was probably inspired by these sites to create an art style for the island resort. Bear with me on this one, guys. I think the stone temple monuments on the island are literally part of a water park that is being built. Think about it. Perfectly edged stone with seemingly zero imperfections or any signs of weathering? That's unrealistic. Furthermore, this cove temple is likely an elevator of sorts, which I think would take you to and from the top of the water slide down to a lazy river. This tunnel right here, this would have been exhausting for an ancient civilization to bore out by hand. I think it's actually going to be a water slide. It just isn't finished yet. Just like this place down below is a lazy river. These temples are fake. They're an art style, just like these ones at the real-life Atlantis resort, among many other similar resorts. And what about Summerstone Castle? That's fake too. I mean, think about it. Why would someone in a time equivalent to the 1700s create a medieval castle? Without modern machinery, this would have been incredibly difficult and not practical for cash crops, which is what this island was likely used for in Phase 3. If there was any capital or authoritative building on the island, it was probably more like an hacienda than a castle, as there's really no need for a feudal system on the small island. This is a tourist castle, just like the Disney World one. It isn't real. You've been lied to for all of these years. Just like Nintendo said, this island was built to be a resort. Still don't believe me? Look at Wii Fit. I believe that Wii Fit takes place about a few years before Wii Sports Resort, as not all of the buildings from earlier, like the castle, had been created. If you think about how rare a perfectly preserved temple full of artifacts is in the archaeological and anthropological world, it's impossible that we wouldn't have a grasp on the civilization that left it behind. These eye points aren't lying to you, they're teasing you, they're joking. The idea that these temples belong to an ancient civilization is a complete joke. Everyone on the island knows it and believes it. There's no deception involved, everyone knows it's not real except us. As time marched on, this resort was developed more and more. The land itself was terraformed to be ideal for golf, with people going so far as to plant invasive pine trees to create a familiar golf setting. A designated scuba area had fake ruins put in place, again as an art style. Think about golf and scuba diving for a second. Both require lessons, renting gear, and heck, scuba requires a certification. It all makes sense. This is about money. Wuhu Island is a cash factory for whoever owns it. It's beautiful, it has a regular town and such, but its primary focus is to make money from tourism and international sports competitions. Cruise ships visit the island because it's a tourist destination. It isn't naturally built for play, it was intentional all along. Heck, we need to consider the possibility that Wuhu Island isn't even the real name of this island. In fact, there's a long-standing indigenous name that has since been lost, just like the one on Rapa Nui. Wuhu Island, Wuhu, that's the name of the resort. It's a fake name. Everything is a lie. This isn't the end. There are still so many things that remain unanswered in the world of Wii Sports. And I promise you, this is just one presentation I have on the history of this island. There will be more. I have to thank you for watching this entire video, and I invite you to join the channel by subscribing and sticking around for more theories. Let me know in the comments how you would amend this theory and what else you think is lurking in this strange world. Thank you all for your time, and good night.